Logline. What's the logline, or the one sentence pitch that is going to tell readers what your book is and is going to let them actually want to read it? Definitely put that in the comments if you're watching this, or whether you're watching it live or watching the replay. And who knows, we may even get you some feedback on your logline. But I want to welcome everyone here that's watching, and I especially want to welcome a special guest with me today. I'm joined by John Scooter Robinson, who and the reason I'm doing this broadcast is because John wrote an awesome article on this topic, and I reached out to him and I said, "Hey, John, let's jam about this on a live stream." So, what's up, John? How you doing?
Hey, what's going on? I'm doing good.
Yeah, so let's just dive right into this thing. I see we got my man James Burton watching, and I'm sure we'll have a few others that'll tune in while we're live here. But the logline, you sort of opened your article saying that you noticed that you were hanging out in some writer communities and some comic creator communities, and this was a word or a term that a lot of people scratching their heads and hadn't heard of. So why do you think that is, and what actually is a logline?
Yeah, so a lot of the time I'll ask, and I had this problem myself, in the past. But a lot of time I'll ask people, "Hey, what's your story about?" And sometimes I'll get, "Oh, it's about zombies," or or it's or like a really long-winded, like 2 or 3 paragraph explanation.
Yeah.
And then I always ask after that. Usually I'll say, "Well, what's your logline?" And then I always like 98% of the time we'll get like, what's that? you know? So, and I read about a logline a few years ago. I got to give credit to Blake Snyder. He didn't invent the logline, of course, but he has a book called Save the Cat. That's where I learned about loglines, and I was like open to this whole new world of holy crap. How didn't I know about this? As a writer and calling myself a writer, and so like this is big, right?
Yeah, I think it's a term that screenwriters all know and are very used to, but in the comic space, or maybe the novel space and other spaces there, maybe not as much. But it's still something that I think, as you just sort of pointed out, you have these conversations with creators, you ask them what their story's about, and I think you nailed it on the head. Usually the response you get is either way too much information such that your eyes roll back in your head and you haven't heard anything because they just talking and talking and talking, or it's something that's so pithy or so just generic that it doesn't make an impact. So like, as you've been diving into it, and the Save the Cat resource is a tremendous resource, especially around things like the log line and getting down to the concrete there. But like, what would you how would you define a log line for anyone that's still scratching their head about this?
Right. Yeah. So basically, a logline's a short, usually 1, no more than 2 sentence statement that really like digs into the premise of your story. It gets straight to the point and it gets out. And you want it specifically so, like you said, people don't have their eyes rolling in the back of their head. It's not quite an elevator pitch. It's like elevator pitch is a little bit longer than a synopsis is when once people are interested, you start you go a little deeper. But this is strictly for getting the quick. This is what it is.
Yeah, and so for anyone watching, I think I linked up to it in the post that you're watching, or the notes for this broadcast. But John wrote an article all on the log line, and so we're going to cover some of what's in here and dive a little bit deeper. And my goal for this is to actually also in sort of real time look at some log lines from creators that have shared them with us, and see if we can't either improve them or just shout you out for doing an awesome job with their log lines. So that's sort of what I hope to do with this broadcast. So we got a few more folks tuning in, and if you want to just say hello in the chat or share somebody that you think should check out this broadcast at some time, include their name in the chat. That way I will actually be able to see that you're here. If you don't chat, I can't actually with the streaming platform that we're using, I actually can't see you. So say hey, say what's up in the chat, and let us know you're here and you're watching. And if you want to really get involved, be brave like Jack and share a log line to one of your books that you're working on that maybe we'll talk about in a bit. But so. All right, so sort of the one sentence pitch. All right, and this is something that that we go into it. But what are some of the key elements that you found are sort of required and sort of must be baked into the log line?
Right. So the reason why it's so difficult is because it's so short, but you have to have at least these 3 to 4 elements. All right. And I say 3 to 4 because depending on the kind of story you're writing, you can some of them kind of work together with one another to to be one. But you have the protagonist. You must mention the protagonist. You must mention the conflict. Now, sometimes people will say the antagonist, but I use that interchangeably. The antagonist or the conflict should be mentioned. Then you're going to have the inciting incident, which is usually the thing that is getting your character on their journey, starting them off, the catalyst that's starting them on their journey. And then finally, the goal, which is, now what are they doing with that? Like, what must they do? And sometimes, again, the goal can kind of get rolled into the conflict or rolled into the inciting incident, depending on your story, and keeping the the length of your log line. But yeah, those are the main elements you want to look at.
Yeah, and so we've got 4 main elements that you just pointed out, and I know that there are some creators that are maybe like, but John, but Tyler, I have an epic. Like I have, a dozen characters and they're all important and they all have, multiple goals and it's a monstrosity. How could I possibly boil my thing down to that just a single sentence or a single line? Like it's not going to do my story justice. Like what would you say to a creator that immediately starts pushing back to you on something like that, John?
Well, I would first of all ask them to say, "Hey, look at an epic. What's the biggest epic that you know?" And size that down as well as you can into a log line. Like Lord of the Rings. I don't have a Lord of the Rings log line sitting in my face, but that the protagonist is probably Frodo, right? No, right. So you'll say a hobbit, and we're not using names here. We're just using what that person is. So that it's a hobbit. And then you're going to use you're going to find probably the antagonist, which is I don't know, Sauron or something like that. So you say a great evil or something, and then you can use you can use the catalyst, which is basically he's charged by a wizard, to go on an epic journey or something like that. This is not a full log line, of course, but kind of the elements, those important elements. You find those, you sit down and you piece those together. You can tell Lord of the Rings in less than 30 words.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
well, the essence of it. Yeah.
And so here's what I would say to that person too is just about like every single movie that has ever been produced or every single television show that's ever been on TV has a log line because they've shown up in like a TV guide or like if you click on it in like your menu, there's always going to be room for like one sentence, but not a paragraph, right? A description. And so if they have to do it, they have to do it. Will Holland's in the house and he said, what's a log line? And so that's what we're talking about here, Will. And yes, I'm Tyler James and I'm joined here by John Scooter Robinson, who is of Scorpio fame, which you're seeing over there. So, so yes, you're talking to royalty here. So here's what we'll do. Like one of the best ways I think to sort of really grasp this is to see some examples. And what I want to do is I'll play a little game here and we'll see how people do. If you're watching this in the chat, I'm going to put up an actual log line from a movie that just about all of you have probably seen. And we'll see if you guys can get it. All right, let me just jump it in here and let's see. Here we go. So what movie am I thinking of here? The lives of 2 mob hitmen, a boxer, a gangster's wife, and a gangster's wife, and a pair of diner bandits intertwined in 4 tales of violence. What movie am I talking about there? And we'll see if anyone in the chat So we'll see who the first person to get that one is. All right. So the lives of two mob hitmen, a boxer, a gangster's wife, and a pair of diner bandits intertwined in fortune's tales of violence. We'll see who the first one to get that is in the chat.
It's one of my favorites.
Yep, it's a classic. And then I'm also going to throw one more in here, and we'll see if they can if we can get this one. The next one is after his crew takes off, assuming him dead, a resourceful astronaut must survive alone on Mars. All right, so that's the other one. All right, we'll see if we get any guesses in the comments. And yes, for number one, Pulp Fiction, Jack knocked that one out. Pretty easy there, Jack. But hey, you got it. So that would be a log line, how you can boil a Tarantino movie with all kinds of characters, all kinds of multiple stories. That's boiled down into one sentence. The second one, after his crew takes off, assuming him dead, resourceful astronaut must survive alone on Mars. And Aaron nailed that one. He said The Martian. So that's that was The Martian. So good job, Aaron, Jack, and everyone else that knew it but didn't have the fast fingers to type it in. So why? What I like about this is you told me essential elements, right? But then you added in your article the concept of seasoning your log line, because let's face it, like your log line is a necessary thing for creators to have, because we need to be able to, in a very economical use of words, get people interested in the story we want to tell. And some people might not make it past one sentence or one line of a pitch at a convention before they keep walking, right? And so just having those four pieces doesn't necessarily a great log line make. And so you called out a few elements that you saw as sort of you called it seasoning for your log lines. And so what were some of those things that you found really can make or break a good log line?
I think the most important one, there's a few in there, but the most important one is going to be that descriptive word for your protagonist, because that creates a sense of an attachment to this character who has no name, because you're not putting their name in there. You're not putting Frodo. You're not putting Harry Potter. You're putting a young child or something hobbit or whatever, however you describe Frodo. But I mean, even a hobbit by itself is a I don't know, but you're using a word to describe that protagonist to create a sense of attachment to them. I wrote, I think in there, I don't have it right in front of me, but I wrote in there about from the Hunger Games. I mentioned a poor woman. Probably could have been a better descriptive word. That was kind of off the cuff, but basically she was of the lower class, and so that kind of creates a sense of attachment to her. And then when you add in the other element of a ruling upper class, it's kind of like, oh, okay, there is a higher class, and she's getting forced to do something that she doesn't want to do, or she's reluctant to do, or that she doesn't have a choice of, which creates conflict. I hope we all know the essence of story is conflict. If you can create conflict in your log line at first glance, then you're already doing the right thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's key. And another thing that you talked about in there is, and I think that's a mistake that some people make is that they will just use their the word or their character's name. But in an economy of words, like your character's name might not have any resonance to your audience. It might, or likewise, like something very generic, like girl or woman, right?
Right.
So that's definitely something to consider as we're diving into this. And so you actually boiled this down into a formula, right? Like a full-on formula that I'm pulling up on screen here. And so break this down for us, like as an equation. What do you have for us?
Right. So I kind of went. It took me a while to like really nail down to this, and it's still not all the way where I want it to be.
Yeah.
But it does have all of the essential elements in there. So usually you start off with a win, and a win or a where. Right. So your win can be usually like after this happened or when this happened. and then you can go in. You can use either that or a setting, for example, like in the Hunger Games logline, in a post-apocalyptic future, creating precedent for this world already creates a little bit of emotion. And then you say, a poor woman, and then again, just with a few words, more attachment. You know what I mean? So you just set up the time frame or the setting, and then you're gonna go into of course, you're gonna mention the protagonist. And you don't have to put one, but you should try, if you can, find that perfect descriptive word for the protagonist, to try to, what about this protagonist do you want readers to know in 1 or 2 words, so that's going to be a descriptive word in the protagonist. And then you're going to have the inciting incident and the catalyst, or vice versa. So those are like sometimes the catalyst word can come before the inciting incident. That's a thing that's rolled all up in one. And then you kind of did with the conflict and the goal, which honestly, the conflict and the goal oftentimes gets rolled up in one. Like if you say, and then they embark on an adventure or something like that, right? That can, depending on the story, it can be the conflict and the goal. These things don't have to be in order either. This is just like a general order that you can use. But once you start doing it, you find that you can move those elements around. Sometimes the catalyst can come before you even mention the protagonist, So yeah.
I mean, I think, as with anything that is copy, sometimes it takes writing a dozen okay ones, like 24 bad versions to get a dozen okay ones, to get 3 really good ones and 1 great one. And but making sure that, before you can cook the meal, you got to have all the ingredients, right? And so that's kind of what you did there. And a good another example here of one that you cited in your article is when 2 curious kids play a mysterious board game, they discover that its dangerous effects come to life and are forced to play through it to stop them. All right, that's Jumanji. But yeah, all those elements are there. It's not just regular kids; it's curious kids. And you talk about the inciting incident of the board game, and then what the stakes are, and what really the core of the conflict is.
Right.
Yeah, awesome. And I mean, so a question I have for you is, at what point in the idea phase are you really trying to work on this, or is this something that you're coming back to at multiple stages of your process?
Oh yeah. So I'd say so. The fun thing is doing it at different stages. So all the log lines are on the site. I thought of movies that I know well and that I liked growing up or whatever, and I made the log lines, and I told myself, do not look at IMDb or anything. Like, just make them without looking. Right? No cheating. And then I looked after to see what they had. But so that's kind of like of course, that's not my story. Yeah. It's just things that we know, and after the process is a little bit different from the beginning. Yeah. Now, I also describe in the article the log line is kind of a North Star for you. So I would say, after you've kind of been rolling this idea around in your head for a little bit, like this is usually before you get down to notes, like before you actually put the pen to the page and make it a concrete thing. Yeah. It's still kind of just an idea. Once you start writing notes out, I would say the second time you go back to your notes, and it can change for anybody, obviously, but I would say the second time you go back to your notes, before you start pinning anything further down, after that initial set of notes, then you write your log line. And then as you go on with your story, I promise you, your log line will change. Yeah. I guarantee you, because you're gonna learn characters. You're gonna figure out themes that maybe you thought you had this theme, and maybe the theme is something else. Your log line will change. So it's not a static thing. I mean, not by the time your book comes out, it should be, but like throughout the writing process, it's not static.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a good advice. Now, there's some common mistakes that writers make when crafting their log lines that make them not quite stand out. And I think Blake Snyder talked about the concept of hiding the ball, which you mentioned in your article. How do you define hiding the ball, and why is that a no-no in your log line?
So hiding the ball is when you think that there's a twist so big that you don't want people to know because you want them to get it when they're in.
Yeah.
The problem with that is if you never make your log line or elevator pitch or whatever, this applies to for anything that if somebody's reading for the first time.
Yeah.
If you don't put that there, then people won't come to see it to begin with.
Yeah.
You know, they won't know, they won't have the bait to go after it. No, it isn't.
And this is something that I think is especially a problem for comic book creators. And the reason for this is because many comic creators, and John Lees actually calls this the first issue problem. And what the first issue problem is, as defined by John, is that many comic creators sort of have the end of their first issue, like the big twist, the big sort of the big sort of cliffhanger of the first issue is actually the inciting incident, is the twist. And if you give away that twist in your in the solicit, if that's all you have, it can reveal it. So, for example, like let's say your high concept. There's an example that John's used. Let's say your high concept is, this woman works for a bunch of blood-sucking lawyers, and but turns out they're actually real bloodsuckers, right? And at the end of the first, like you could see where you write it, and at the end of the first issue, she discovers that, and the audience discovers that her bosses are actual lawyers, but also vampires, right? Like that's sort of I don't think that's a real book or anything. It probably will be eventually, but John used that as an example. But if it's like, if that's your pitch, then that kind of ruins your first issue. Right. And so but to sell the series as a whole, you actually need to include that. You can't hide the ball there, right? So that is an interesting thing. Any other things that you see potentially that creators might make a mistake on when it comes to writing their log line?
I don't know if I mentioned earlier when I first gave my definition, but the length is super important. 30 words or less. I've seen people say hard cap at 27. I'm like, okay, 30 words or less for your log line. Yeah. If you count the words, even if they're like these and A's, cut it down. Right. There's something in there that's too long. You got to cut it down.
And I think that's a great note. Another one I think is sometimes writers want to impress us with their writing, but with a log line, your goal is to be crystal clear. And to not confuse at all. And so I would almost I know something like dumb it down to at least a elementary school reading level, such that we don't get hung up on your turns of your peculiar turns of phrase, but as we're trying to figure out whether or not this is something that we might even be interested in giving it a shot.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
And then the other one that I saw a lot, actually, we're going to look at some real log lines that creators shared to get some feedback on in a minute. But one of the mistakes or things that it's not necessarily a mistake, and these are still useful to have, but a log line is not, it's Pulp Fiction meets The Martian. Right. Like that's a shorthand device that a lot of creators will effectively use when pitching at conventions or taking meetings with Hollywood or whatnot. But you would never see that if you were clicking on the show and on Netflix, and it's not going to say it's this means that, and then you're done. Right. It actually needs to tell what the story is, because two things that people have heard of before does not a story make, and does not tell effectively what the through line is, the clear through line is. So those are a couple of things that I think. Joe has a question here. Joe posted this comment. He said, when to log line or when not to log line? He said, from my experience, typical log lines don't work well for ongoing series as opposed to limiting series, one-shot story, or single issues. What is a good way to deal with the formula when there is no ending goal or multiple catalysts that happen throughout an ongoing series? What would you say to Joe?
So actually, at one point in my making of log lines, I wrote one for Spider-Man. Because Spider-Man is a comic series, ongoing, different stuff happens all the time. But his basic log line is: after receiving powers from a radioactive spider, a high school kid accepts the call to be a superhero in order to save his city. All right. You're not trying to give people a by issue example of your story in your log line. You're trying to give people a high level, this is basically what it is, and the kinds of things that you'll be saying. So I would keep it kind of high level, and then leave your per issue basis stuff for like your, like the little synopsis at the beginning of a comic, right. Like on the first, the inside cover page.
Yeah. I mean, I would say to Joe, I would say your entire series needs to be, you need to be able to boil your log line down into an entire series, because if John can do that for Spider-Man, which has been around for 50 or 50 plus years, if Robert Kirkman can do that for the Walking Dead series, which is over 200 issues, I don't care how many issues you've put out of your series or how long you think it's going to go. If they can do it, you can do it. But there's nothing to say you couldn't also have a log line for each individual issue as well, right. And in fact, if your each individual issue does not have a setting, a protagonist, and some sort of incident and conflict and a goal, then you're probably don't have a story that needs that's worth telling. Right?
And I think most comic writers, most of us here are probably comic writers. I write in arcs anyway. Most time my structure isn't. I mean, there's a kind of a tiny, 3-act structure per issue, but it's really per arc. Per 3, 4, 5 issues.
Right. Awesome. So let's look at some. All right. And because he was brave enough to be the first person to pop one on here, let's take a look at Jack's logline here. He says, a punk elf Hispanic hacker and her boss dukes it out with the magical hipsters in a coffee shop to prevent a Twitter god from going viral. All right. What? So let's look at first the content, and then what would you say to Jack? Does he hit the necessary elements?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I might tweak it a little bit, but for the most part, I do think the elements are there at first glance. I see. So there's a duke out, there's a fight. So that there's your conflict. You've got a location there, being the coffee shop, and you start off the punk elf Hispanic hacker. So it kind of creates a precedence for the kind of character this is. Okay, a punk elf. So you kind of get the sense that it might be maybe a magical world, Hispanic hacker. I'll maybe take Hispanic out. I get that for the diversity aspect, that could be a grabber, but that's not really what your logline is for. You want to get to the core of it. You know what I mean? Yeah. Unless the cultural part is important to the story. Punk elf, though, that creates the precedent that this might be a magical world to me. If she's a hacker, not a fighter, she's fighting with her boss. Also kind of creates something. Now, what I don't see here, to prevent a Twitter god from going viral, I might reword that a little bit, because your inciting incident / catalyst type thing is, I don't really quite see it. Why do they have to fight to prevent the Twitter god from going viral? I would maybe tweak it a little bit for that. But most of the elements are there, though. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that I want to encourage you to also do with your log line is think to yourself, could a human being, like a real human being who wasn't you, who memorized this, actually repeat this to their friend when talking about it? Because and this is where I think Jack loads up his log line a little bit too descriptively and with a little bit too much, such that like I cannot see someone as like, oh, have you read Jack's new book? Yeah, it's awesome. What's it about? Well, it's about a punk elf Hispanic hacker and her boss who duke it out with magical hipsters in a coffee shop to prevent a Twitter guy. Like, it's just too much, right? So for a one sentence thing, let's trim it down a little bit. I think 3 adjectives on your protagonist name is probably too much for that. But yeah, I mean, I think the elements are definitely there, and it's clear sort of from the tone of this that this is sort of, I mean, I'm imagining we're getting sort of a madcap fantasy techno comedy here. So I like the fact that just from that, I also get a little bit of sense of tone from it. So, so good job, Jack. And definitely some ways that you can improve that as well. Let's see. Aaron's here live. He says, in a war-torn borough of Harlem, a devious entity maintains control over the population until a trio of teenagers decide to take a stand. Thoughts?
Okay. So we got the setting. We've got, say, a borough of Harlem, a devious entity maintains control over the population. Is a devious entity the protagonist? It seems like in this case, well, no, the trio of teenagers protect. So he just flipped it.
Yeah,
so
he flipped the conflict and the protagonist. That's cool.
Yeah, so like I said, it doesn't have to be in order. Like it's in the little thing there. It could be the formula. It could be flipped. So yeah, you say an entity maintains control over the population until a trio decides to take a stand. I like it. I would say so. Decide to take a stand, and again, this is not that it's bad, but to improve it, the decide to take a stand. Again, the catalyst. I would try to find something that forces them, like to where they have no choice to take a stand. Like something happened with this devious entity, because you say maintains as if he's had control for a while. So something happens to where the teenagers are like, "We're done. We gotta take a stand."
Yeah.
So I would find a way to make it like a definitive. What's the word I'm looking for? Oh, point of no return. Something where it says I can't turn back, or something that's forcing you. Words like force, words like drafted, enlisted, stuff like words like that are good turning back terms.
Yeah. Love it. Love the feedback. Let's look at a couple. So I posted this earlier today because I knew we were coming on inside the Comics Launch Pro private Facebook group. And we got some folks that submitted inside our community. And so I want to actually just pull up a couple here. You may not be able to read that, but let me just check out what we got from Russell Nolte. So Russell posted a bunch of his, and I'll just do the first one here. He says, Ichabod Jones is about a psychopath who escapes from a mental asylum and becomes a monster hunter during the apocalypse, but he doesn't know if he's killing monsters, humans, or it's all in his head the whole time.
I'm not mad. Again, we talked about earlier their names, so I'll take the name out. Just for the sake of keeping it shorter. I like the general idea. The monsters, humans, or I would find a way. I don't know the story exactly, but I would find a way to trim that down into a shorter statement. But a psychopath who escapes from a mental asylum and becomes a monster hunter. I'd maybe just define him as a monster hunter. Or maybe the description of the protagonist is psychopathic monster hunter. I think that capture people out right off the jump.
And like one of the things that like the word, another thing that I want or like with that can be a little bit difficult is like I think in his story that Ichabod's a teenager. I could be wrong, but if he is, then like using the word teenage psychopath or whatever would sort of soften psychopath a little bit. Sometimes it's hard to like when you hear like immediately presented with the word psychopath, it's hard not to think of that person as like going to be the, it's hard to see that as the protagonist unless you can soften that sometime or be related to that at some point in time. Oh, hey, Newton just shared this. Thanks, Newton. What's up, man? Go ahead. You more thoughts on that?
I was just really quick. I was just kind of thinking. I think starting with, again, remember that when statement. I think starting maybe with after escaping a mental asylum. Sorry, psychopath. Monster hunter, goes on a killing spree, but he doesn't know if he's killing monsters or humans. So something like that. Not exactly, but something like that.
Yep. Cool. Jumping down here to here's Tim took a shot at your formula. He said, when a street mime is found asphyxiated inside an actual invisible box, can the simian superhero knockaround guy find the murderer before he finds himself in the crosshairs?
Yeah, so that deviates a little bit, but I kind of like how that goes when a street mime is found asphyxiated inside of a visible box. Yeah, I kind of like that. I mean, I guess we see kind of the catalyst there. He's locked in a box, kind of like how does he get out of the box? Yeah, I mean, I would maybe create some more clarity around it. It's hard to say without knowing more about the story, but I would create a little bit more clarity around it. But like the base form is there.
Yeah, and I mean, like I love another thing that Snyder also hits on, and something that I hit on with in a lot of the things that I do, is you cannot over like the secret sauce that makes so many pitches work, especially in person, especially at conventions, and especially the thing that gets people talking about your pitches and sharing your pitches is irony, right? Yeah. Irony is like this special sauce that just does it. And the concept of a street mime found asphyxiated inside an actual invisible, like a real invisible box.
Right.
Like that's, I mean, that right there is like, okay, all right, this guy is working on a level that I want to know more. I want to see more from him.
That's the killer line right there.
Yeah. I think, so good stuff there, Tim. In terms of the format for log lines, I think a lot of log lines don't necessarily ask questions, which is not it's not a bad thing to ask questions as a part of your pitch or things like that. Usually the formats that you see log lines in, they don't necessarily usually have questions, but I think the elements are there, and that's pretty solid. Here's Rob Multari's book Nightwolf. He says, a teenager discovers on his 18th birthday that he was born a werewolf and is reluctantly thrown into a supernatural war. Thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think he hits the main point. I would say, so as a log line, I think it's good. I would say that whatever is the deeper element of your story needs to also be in there, though. I don't know much more about the story, but it does sound like a lot of werewolf stories. And that's not to say that there's not more to it, but we don't know what the more to it is inside of that log line. So I would try to find what's different about that werewolf story and put that into the log line.
Yeah, definitely. Like finding what's the special sauce that makes yours truly unique is important. Brian Rodman's here. And again, so a lot of this format stuff, like Memoirs of a Angel is a fantasy series that like this is stuff that you're telling what it is. Whereas the log line is you got a sentence to give us the heart and the spine of the story. So we don't need to tell, like, we don't need we don't need commentary on the story. We need the story. And so that's just the different. That's not to say that like knowing that information isn't important, Brian. It's just when we're talking about log lines and technically, and I mean, I want everybody that's putting in the work. I want you all to be taking Hollywood meetings and at some point and being able to, have your stuff considered, and just knowing some of these terms in advance is helpful, and how to actually put them appropriately. But here, the heart of it, a broken man named Jonathan Young, as his quest for revenge entangles him in a cosmic war that has been raging for centuries, overlapping the physical and unseen realms.
Yeah, I would reformat it, but I like the core elements there. The core elements are captivating. Rewording it and making it, shorter.
Okay, great. And so we had a couple. This meets that, and I pointed them back to your article to say give it a little read there. And make sure that it's an actual log line. Let's do Brant's Last Ember. Ember Madison was a typical teenager until the day the fire started. Now she must figure out what her purpose is and stop an emerging evil that threatens everything she holds dear.
That sounds like one of the it's a good description, a good grabbing element, but I don't think it's a log line. Yeah. It's one of those things you see in a book, like on the back of a book or something like that, or a quick blur, but it's not quite a log line. Closer to an elevator pitch. Elevator pitch requires more information, but again, I like how it sounds, but it's still not telling us really what the story is. So
yeah, yeah, and that's sort of it's a different thing. Like it's not like this. It's not like that sort of having that piece of copy for your marketing isn't helpful, Brant.
right.
It's just that it's not necessarily the tightest version of what you can do here, and it's a logline. Also, one of the things is, blank is a typical teenager. Like, I feel like I don't know any teenager nowadays that thinks of themselves as a typical teenager, and I don't necessarily know that billing your characters as a typical anything, even if they are, like, if that helps sell your book more than something else. And so, like, I guarantee you, there's something interesting about that character. I'd rather see that than atypical, right? So, but like Peter Parker, he was shy, he was nerdy, he was like, even though he's still our avatar for the Marvel universe, even though he's still the character that we relate to, Peter Parker's far from typical.
Right.
All right, let's do Shane here, Beast King. Jake Stevens, who was genetically modified in the womb, is on the hunt to avenge the murder of his parents, but must determine if he will become the man his parents always knew he could be, or become the beast he was born to be.
Yeah, I think I find the same general issue as the last one. Kind of a thing, a good element to use, not quite a log line, but something that can, that you can give after the log line. The log line is like usually your introductory thing. Like when somebody, especially when think about when you're at a table at a con, because we all go to cons. Most of us are and probably should be going to cons if we're not yet. Yeah. We're gonna have people. There's like people all over the place, and people, hey, what's your book about? You hear that question like 30,000 times a day at a con. You got to be able to spit that quick line, and then when they ask for more, then you give something like, oh, it's about Jake Stevens. He was genetically modified in womb, blah blah. But that log line has to get the essence to begin to start.
Yeah, again, I would think about the game of telephone, right? Think about like kind of what I talked on earlier. Like, could you imagine a human being, like a real human being who is not you, who didn't write the thing, deliver your log line after hearing it a couple of times or after hearing it once? And this is just, I think, a case of too many words to be a single log line. And sort of, yeah. So I would encourage Shane, that might be useful for some cases, but I'd still do the exercise of like, what's my one airtight sentence that really nails it in as few words as I can get it. Let's see. So David Taylor wrote The Grave, a cult 9/11. In 1911, 250,000 and a dead body. That's what he found on a desert hotel, and it nearly got him killed. A year later tonight, he's out for revenge. But with so we're already we're already David. Like this is a short paragraph, and his one sentence here is: the Coens cast Sylvester Stallone in a revenge thriller about victims, survivors, and letting go of the past. So I would still encourage David to go through the exercise of just going through the logline formula and seeing if you can get it down to one single airtight sentence that that goes through it. And here's the other thing: like, I don't know if you've had this experience, but the more times you pitch something, the better you get at pitching it. And the more different ways you can pitch it, the more of those things that you have sitting in your back seat, like in your back pocket that you can pull out, the more ways that you're going to connect with people. And so this isn't just, moving words around. Like, this is really getting to the heart and the core of conveying ideas, which is a big part of what the job is. Right.
Right.
So let's look at Joe's here. Joe says, superpowered, and I think Joe probably typed this on his phone, so I'll try to correct. I think we've got a couple typos here, but he said a superpowered Amazon, in the literal sense, is looking for redemption as she seeks acceptance as she saves her hometown from shadowy madmen. Thoughts on that one?
Superpowered Amazon in a literal sense. I would take out the literal sense.
Yep. Yeah. That unnecessary. Superpowered Amazon. People know what an Amazon is. Yep.
Is looking for redemption as she seeks acceptance to save her hometown from a shadowy madman. A superpower. So I'm looking for kind of that hook superpower Amazon that creates a little bit of interest. Okay,
Mhm.
Amazon. She's looking for redemption. Give us a why is she looking for redemption? Try to give us that why, which I know it's difficult
Yeah.
because it's like, man, I only got 30 words.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
trust me. Like log lines aren't easy, just so you
No.
guys know. Like,
Yeah,
I've poured over mine a billion times. Like,
yeah. Yeah, yeah. And like I would also look at this like, is it redemption or acceptance that is the
right.
most powerful? Like let's cut it down to just one core thing, because economy of words and again, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like just what's the most important thing there. And also like redemption and acceptance are sort of two, like the sort of equal level of emotional sort of, but they're not like those super emotional, like super tangible goals there. So like two super intangible goals does not equal one, you know, infinity gems, like an infinity gauntlet or whatever. Like what's the visceral thing that people are really gonna
And I wonder,
respond?
I kind of wonder if you're playing hide the ball a little bit here, because you
Mm,
say she's looking for redemption. I mean, if you go after the formula, it's usually you can say when blank or after blank. So you can say after thing that she did wrong.
mm.
A superpower Amazon, you know, whatever. She's looking for redemption for this thing that you state. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
And make that as short as 16 as possible. I don't think that will give away your story too much, and I think that it'll create a more of an attachment to what happened with this character.
Yeah, good stuff. Let me just look at one over here. Shane says Undead is a zombie family drama about an undead family man struggling to win back the love and respect of his wife and kids, and to reconcile his vegetarian morals against his insatiable cravings for flesh.
I like it. I mean, it's not really a log line, but I like it in general. I like the description.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. I mean, Shane, this is a book that Shane's had a lot of success with on Kickstarter and has
yeah.
done many times and it pitched it. I know Shane even had the opportunity to pitch that. He talked about it on the Comics Launch podcast, pitched that idea to some television executives in Australia and things like that. And it was definitely went over well. But still not a log line. You're sort of again with these log lines specifically, you're not giving commentary about the story. You're getting to the heart of what is the story that we're going to tell. All right.
Right.
But what I love about this is Shane really does nail that sense of irony in that, and you know, all right, we know exactly what we're getting with this. So that's a pitch that I know would probably kills for him. Literally pun over at conventions. I did
That's an
want
elevator
to.
pitch.
I also posted a couple of this over at the Indie Comic Conspiracy, and I know we're running a little bit long here, but so we'll wrap up very soon. But let's just check a couple. Phil, I saw Phil was watching this and shared this, which is very cool. And thanks, Javi, for sharing as well. But Phil's is former spy partners reunite. Excuse me. Former spy partners turn lovers are forced to reunite and hunt down a slasher maniac murdering their own, but both suspect the other as the killer.
Hmm. I like the premise of the story. The log line, I would definitely reconfigure that a little bit. I might start off with the fact that they're married after being married for 10 years or however long, you know, two former spies, uh, you know, reunite to hunt down a maniac. Uh, you can almost leave it at there. You almost don't have to say that suspects the other is killer. If you could find a nice way to slip that in there, that would be nice. It's not necessarily you don't necessarily need that though. But that is a nice element. So if you could find a way to put it in there and still keep it succinct, you know, or find a way to say maybe not say that they're going after a slasher maniac murdering. Maybe the big part is that they're going to end up trying to fight each other or suspect each other as a killer. You can maybe not mention a slasher maniac, and maybe just mention a mission pits them against one another, you know, or you know, something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it may actually like. Yeah, this is a concept that I know Phil's been working on for a while, and just you know, twists and turns, and sometimes sometimes ideas take a while to really get to the core of it. But I think he's getting closer, because every time I check in with him, it seems a little stronger. Jeff just shared this video as well. Thanks, Jeff. Let's see what Jeff has. He says Stuart Chin thought he and his fellow prodigies were heading to a national science fair. He never imagined they would awaken to find themselves abandoned in the underground corridors of a strange experimental facility. This ragtag group of misfits must use their wits to overcome dangerous obstacles, carnivorous plants, and a relentless killer robot if they ever hope to escape from the scientists.
Again, long for a log line.
Yeah.
I call it a good, good back of the book synopsis or something like that.
Yeah.
It gives a good description, but I would still, again, cut off all the extras, cut off the name, really get to the core. Who the protag is with the group of misfits.
Yeah, I mean, like we talked about, a colorful way to describe your protagonist or protagonists, like ragtag group of misfit prodigies, like that. I mean, that is like that right there is something that pulls me in. So I think he's got the elements there. It's just, can what's the challenge to get it down to just one airtight, has to be able to fit in the limited space on your Netflix, like the one sentence Netflix thing. Let's see it here. Here's one from Eric. He said, the linguistic parts of speech weaponize ancient alphabets to defeat speech stranglers, truth destroyers, and a brainwashing Tower of Babel in the action fantasy comic series Mil-Ma Fighting Words.
So, that's almost there. Obviously cutting off the name of the book and whatnot. You don't have to put the name of the book because in a logline specifically, because you're going to put the name of the book and then your logline. So they're going to know the name of it.
Right.
I mean, even in Scorpio, I say 12, I say blah, 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 12 mystical relics. I don't have to say that they're in the Zodiac because it's called Scorpio. So when I say 12 mystical relics, you're like, oh, you're probably talking about the Zodiac. So we'll wrap those parts and you probably get there.
Yeah. So let's see. This is kind of fun. Joe took another crack at his log lines after getting some feedback from us. Let's see what he's done here. He says, after being viewed as a murderous abomination for defending herself in her teen years, a superpowered Amazon is looking for redemption as she saves her hometown from the grips of shadowy madmen.
Oh, getting there. I still think it's a tiny bit long, but we're getting there though.
Yeah.
I will cut out some of those words. After being viewed, I will look for like other words to make it more succinct.
Right. But those are very passive. After being viewed, like so. I mean, you want to get a little bit more visceral in your storytelling, because if all people were doing was just sitting back and she's a murderous abomination, let's go back in the house and cook dinner. If someone was a murderous abomination, like I wouldn't just want people judging them. I'd was there conflict over there? But yeah, So good stuff though, Joe. It's definitely, you're definitely on the right path. Again, a lot of times this is like, it's putting more stuff in, it's moving pieces around, and then it's a big culling process. All right. I want to do just one more because we were coming up on almost an hour here. So this is a long stream. Thanks everyone who shared this, by the way. And for anyone that's, we'll play this game for comments and stuff down the line after the fact as well. So don't be shy about, if you watch this replay, posting comments. But let's finish strong with James Burton here. He says, Damage Inc. is the story of friends who start a club to hunt down supernatural monsters and superpowered metahumans for bounties. But there is a problem. They suck at it. So every time they go out, they manage to start fights that end in gunfire, explosion, and smack talk.
So all of the suck at it, the smack talk, and all of that, we can find a couple of words, some kind of descriptive word or a couple of descriptive words to define that. So you could say a group of something friends, and that can encompass that entire last line. and then you go into the rest of the description. Again, it's really hard to do it on the fly, but you again just making those statements more compact. It's hard to find that one or two words that gets the idea of these guys that suck.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, again, still keep the premise. I mean, it's not quite a log line, but the general premise and using that, pitches are still good. So yeah.
Definitely. Definitely. Well, hey, thanks everybody for tuning in and for watching and for sharing your log lines for us to give a little critique on and to hammer on. I really do appreciate that. I know John appreciates it. And make sure you check out John's article and give a crack at this. If you don't have a story that you're working on right now, I still want to give you a little piece of homework or exercise. Whatever your favorite movie is of all time, here's your comics launcher for this. I want you to go and to pick your favorite movie of all time and then craft a log line using John's formula for your favorite movie of all time. Then go over to IMDb after you've done this and read the log line that actually is associated with that thing, and see what elements you got, see what elements are different, and see which ones you like better. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, I'm going to link to this article, make sure that everybody gets it, John, but anything else that you want to plug or you want to let people know to keep an eye out coming from you in the near future?
So there's the article. This is my blog, forfall.net. Also, I'm the writer and creator of Scorpio, which I also did through Comics Launch. So you can see when you go to the page, you'll see Scorpio. It's always on the right-hand side. So if you click that, you can get to the page and grab issue of Scorpio. Number 2 is on the way. You can find me on Facebook, John Scooter Robinson, or on Twitter is IV Wall. So that's IVWALL.
Awesome, John. We'll be looking forward to checking out more stuff from you. And thanks so much for coming on this live stream with me.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. And thank everybody for tuning in. And I can't wait to see what you launch next. Take care now.